Hello, welcome once again to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. It's the top of the hour as Svan's clock is letting us know. It is good to be back with a decent camera again. Producer Nick walked me through some troubleshooting, so we're back to not looking so blurry and slightly less handsome than normal. It's great to talk to you guys. We have Witan Svan on tonight. We will be going through Baldrs draumar, relatively short, but a really cool poem from our lore. So I want to give everybody max time to look that up, and Nick can throw that up. As always, we're using the Bellows translation tonight. Feel free to use whichever one you prefer if you've got one you like. If not, this link is pretty handy, and it kind of gives you the order and the stuff that we're going through, because this is our plan on how we're tackling the Eddas as far as part of our lore. It is already October, so welcome to October. Top of the show updates. If you can make it, and time is getting very close, we'd love to see you at Winter Nights. Winter Nights in New Hampshire.
Cannot wait.
11th to the 13th. I will be there. Svan will be there. Many other amazing people will be there. It is going to be absolutely beautiful. It's going to be my first time in that part of the country, so I am really looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to meeting all of our new AFA family that I have not met in the area, as well as spending some time with some folks that I haven't gotten to see in a while. So this is going to be great, and I hope that all of you, if you would like to, would join us. Talk to your folk builder if you want to get all set up for that. So also coming up next month, we have Feast of the Einherjar in South Dakota. That's going to be another really good one. I would invite everybody who can to be there. I'm looking forward to meeting those folks and spending time with some folks I've already gotten to know a little bit once I get there. Other stuff, top of the show. We are still chipping away at the Njordshof debt. We're inching ever so much closer on that. Got it. What is that? Looks a little bit 67.82% paid off on that. That is a huge amount, and it is due to you guys' generosity. So we appreciate that. Again, we've only had it for a relatively short amount of time. Started out as our most expensive Hof so far, because Florida is just the place to be. But in 2 years and 2 months, we've been able to significantly pay it down. And we're looking forward to getting that paid off as quickly as we can. And we appreciate you guys' help to do so. If you're interested, link is we have a donate link at runestone.org. Also, everybody who is listening to this program, please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about it, tell folks that might be interested about it. Our best tool that we have, our most effective tool that we have right now is word of mouth. So if you like it, please shout it from the rooftops. And if you don't like it, shh. But yeah, we appreciate you guys. We appreciate our audience. So much of this show content is audience driven and question based, and you guys have been great at providing that and participating. We appreciate you. It's hard to believe that we are 117 episodes in, but it's proved to be a really good tool to bring people home and to spread the message of our faith, our values of Asatru, and build fame for the ICER. So we're working hard to do that. Everybody who is watching live, we got a number of live options for you. Here on YouTube, we are live on Odyssey, on Entropy, on Twitch, over on Twitter, Rumble and VK, as well as here on YouTube. We also come out on Fridays as a podcast, if that's the way you want to consume this. We've got it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Podcasts, or Amazon Music, I think. So those links are all in the description, as are links to if you guys want to buy us a coffee to donate or whatever. But we appreciate you guys. And I think we're ready to get into some stuff. So, Svan, is there any background that folks need to be familiar with before we start our reading this evening?
Structurally, this is a very small poem. And it is most likely composed by either the skalds that, if there was maybe a small group of them, or specifically one that did Thrimskvida and the Volaspau. So the theory is that these are either the same poets or at least one. And it's really, really straightforward. I believe one verse actually mimics another verse from Thrimskvida, almost to the letter. So that's why a lot of the leaning towards that. It is written in the Fornidhislag style. And Fornidhislag style is an interesting style. I think it's my most preferred. It's also one of those that, if anybody's interested in perhaps doing a kind of a paralleling of poetics in prayer or in song, Fornidhislag and the way that it's written is easy to do. Now, it doesn't translate very well in from, like, say, Old Norse to English, but you can kind of get it. If you follow along, the way that the rhyming that was done back then was done through alliterative writing or rhyming. So generally, there was two sounds in the first part of the sentence, and the second half of the sentence had to start with that sound. So imagine if, we're saying a sentence with a comma in the middle, and the sound is going to be the T sound. So there's going to be a T in the front of that comma and a T in that latter half of the comma. And then the second sentence that's spoken will also have a T. And this created a kind of rhythmic, alliterative rhyming sound that was common, and also most likely lent to the idea that the poems could be sung as well. Like, perfect example, if we were to say, and this is from a song, or the death song, hard, so the sound is H, hard is the road, comma, to Hela's home. And then that would be one sentence. The second sentence would then start with an H. Heimdall's children, they do go. And that's just referencing the pathways that all of us must take to death. So that's kind of a cool thing that I was looking at earlier today that I wanted to make note of, to let people, if you're writing prayers or writing things in dedication, Fornidhislag style is a really easy and fun way to become conscious of your speech, which is ultimately, I think, the spiritual power of poetry. And so once you become that consciousness of your speech, you're able to kind of formulate speech that is directive and purposeful in relation to the gods, the ancestors, or the land whites. Outside of that, most people, I think, know this more from the Gylfaginning and also from the Volaspau. This is referencing the Voluspa almost in parallel, but it focuses particularly around Lord Odin coming down into the realm of the dead, which again, the gods do not go there very often. And it is seen as an arduous journey. And he raises the vulva. And there were some people, arguing whether this was the same vulva. But again, she's referenced in the Voluspa and in the Gylfaginning. The likelihood that this is some other, witch or seeress is pretty unlikely. And she is asked by Lord Odin, why is Hela's hall being bedecked with gold and things of that nature? So a kind of a foreshadowing of the moment that two of the gods turn in on themselves, i.e. Hother and Balder, and that the soul or the spirit of a god is about to descend into the realm farthest away from heaven. And so this is just a tragic story, but it's really kind of a bridge between, two stories. The predominance of the Voluspa and the death of Balder. And that's why the title. So a lot of times you'll see the title written as Vetamskvider, and that confuses a lot of people. Vetamskvida it means the wanderer's utterances. Ve, remember the G is usually kind of a soft GY sound. Vetam is, of course, Lord Odin as the wanderer, and Kvidas is his utterings, and so his speech that is held at that time. And Baldrs draumar in and of itself, most people actually think of that more as the actual slaying of Balder, because he has a dream before he is slain. And that's when the story in which the holy Frigga tries to oath all things to not harm Balder. So that it does cause some confusion in there. Outside of that, not much. Again, it's a really short, concise poem.
All right. Well, without further ado, will you take folks through it and read this short but dramatic piece of our lore?
Okay. Yeah.
In Reamer.
No, I can't do that. Not yet.
Of Iceland. Go ahead.
Weak Icelandic. No. Okay, so starting out in stanza 1, and there's no real introduction lines. It just goes straight into it. And there is some good lore drops during this poem, but an interesting structuring. Actually, something that you and I were just talking about before the show with producer Nick about the gendering of groups is like right out in the first stanza, and I didn't realize it until just now.
It's funny. I've noticed this, and I never. So the challenge tonight, this is a 15 stanza poem. So Svan and I are going to wax poetic on a bunch of different little things here, because again, the poem's pretty small, but there's a lot of little extra topics that come up, and I think those rabbit trails are one of the things I enjoy about this. And I hope you guys sometimes enjoy listening to, even if they're not all your cup of tea. One of the things that I think is really special about doing this, and I think all too often is not appreciated enough by those of us in the moment. So we talk a lot about the flow of earth and doing right things in the right order at the right time in the right seasons. And the more you live nobly and adjust yourself in your life to be in alignment with that, the more things you start to notice synchronicities. You start to notice pieces fitting together and threads weaving together. One thing that is very striking to me doing this program the longer that I do is the connectivity within the same conversation or the same day or the same thing that goes on, the points that touch back on something we earlier spoke about in the same show or in the same show prep, all of the pieces that start fitting together and connecting to one another. And I think that's important. I think it's because we are training ourselves, both us presenting the program, but also you in the audience, to see and think through an Asatru lens, through the appropriate lens of Earth. But I think that also stuff starts fitting together because we're getting better at this collectively as we grow and as we do things that are pleasing to the gods and that are, in the right flow of things. Stuff starts working and building upon each other. And I think that that's evidenced in that in a way. And I think it's neat every time I notice it. And I hope you guys notice it too, but I find it kind of meaningful. But yeah, you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, we were talking about, just to let everyone know, like what we were talking about, how the Germanic language has like a group titling, and that group titling is often mirroring with the masculine titling, and then the feminine titling of the word is usually separate and unique. So like if you have like man, that meant people, but it also meant male people. And then separated from that, there is Wiefman, which would be, wife person.
Wife, man. Hey, yeah.
Now. And or because it's used in the overall sense. And so the feminine often got a kind of a special nomenclature that was not lumped into the group. I'm sure somebody will try to say that it's like exclusatory or what have you, but that's just the way that the language formulated. And we see it here because the usage of the word in the first line, sen vauru Aesir aller Althingi. The Aesir are the plurality of the gods, the totality of them. But then in the next line, they speak specifically about the kind of getting together as only the goddesses. So in stanza 1, once were the gods together met, and the goddesses came, and councils held, and the far famed ones, again, those who have risen after death, ascendant ones, the truth would find why baleful dreams to Baldur had come. So now all of the gods, all of the goddesses, or all of the Aus and all of the Ausinur and all of the ascendant ones who, because of their far fame, has brought them up into the heavenly realm. They would find out why a dream had befallen to Baldur. And so this kind of runs parallel to that story. So right now, as Baldur has the dream and the gods come together, it is Lord Odin who immediately takes to his horse and goes the long and treacherous road to the place that is farthest away from the heavenly realm. And he's doing this specifically to gain insight. But in stanza 2, then Odin rose, the enchanter old. And you can see it in stanza 2 if you're following along. Up rise Odin, Aldagauter. Gauter is where we get the word God from. Most people don't realize that God is not a Semitic word. It's not even a Greek word. And it is uniquely Germanic. So the Aldagauter, the god of ancient ways, spells. And the saddle he laid on Sleipnir's back. Sleipnir, of course, is, or Sleipnir, excuse me, I'm doing the German EI. Sleipnir, whose name means the slipping one, or the one that can slip between realms. Thence rode he down to Nifhel deep, and the hound he met that came from hell. So important to remember, a lot of folks out there, or I wouldn't say a lot of folks because there isn't many of them, but a lot of the ones that follow away from the correct path, they view Ausgarður and heaven as synonymous. And there is a paralleling in the worlds between Ausgarður and Helgarth, because Helgarth resides in Nifhel. And so it is a place within a place. Ausgarður as well is a place within heaven, or Himin, or Himinya. And so they kind of, again, parallel. And what, there is a holy god that stands on the edge of Ausgarður in heaven. And he is Heimdall. And then in juxtaposition, there is the hound. And this hound is Garm. And so when he rides down, there is just a brief mentioning of the threshold guardian of Niflhel, or the Hellhound. And that's most likely where the Hellhound, mythos comes from. It's a, linking memory back to the old religion before Christianity. So he rode to Nifhel deep, and the hound he met that came from hell. 3, he says, bloody he was on his breast before. At the father of magic he howled from afar. Forward rode Odin, the earth resounded, till the house so high of hell he reached. So he is blaring through the realms on the slipping horse, as it transfers through, and he comes upon Garm, whose chest is drenched with blood, and that blood is from the dead who walk beneath him. He is quite literally the gate at Nipa's cave. And that's the assurance that certain spirits, once they pass him, they don't return, and nothing gets in. Unless, of course, you are riding Sleipnir.
So I want to pause for a sec because I want to acknowledge a couple of things before you get forward. This is it's really short, but if you notice, the point of it isn't just narrative. It's to be a pleasing, cool piece of poetry. And it is. The imagery is really striking. It's very powerful. And I wanted to point out a little bit about etymology, because stuff that we talk about, and I think this is an interesting point. The word God, it's kind of Germanic, but it's also kind of Greek. It's kind of Indo-European, and it goes back to the very earliest days of our connectivity. It's 0 parts Semitic, but it goes back to, and again, when they go in the Proto-Indo-European, there's a lot of funny notations over letters and stuff that I'm not going to pretend I get right. The well actuallys on this, please let me know, because you know more about it than I do as far as the pronunciation. But from gu, which goes to gutos, but gu is the act of to pour or to libate, to offer a liquid offering with mead or wine or beer or whatever that might be. So I know that there is a lot of emphasis on animal sacrifice and things in the elder period, even human sacrifice. But it's interesting to see that the oldest form of worshiping, and the more that some of you may be aware of this, Svan and myself and the Asatru Folk Assembly in general, certainly the Gothar, are on a journey to educate ourselves on Old Norse. It is a challenge. We're working through it. We're nowhere near close to getting it perfect, but we're making progress. And when it feels like, man, never going to get this, this is too hard, it's crazy, I'm not getting it at all, I'm surprised at how much stuff does sink in. So it's really interesting on this, looking at the word bloat and its etymology. Always thought it meant blood. It doesn't. It's actually from a different root. And the oldest records of this, the more we learn, is, like I mentioned, that idea of pouring and libating. And the idea of pouring out an offering to a deity goes back to the Proto-Indo-European, like original Aryan times, before we've separated out, before the people that you think of as Germanic or Greek or Latin or Celtic or Slavic, back when we were all together, that was how we offered. And there may well have been animal sacrifices and other sacrifices as well. I'm not diminishing those in any way. But one thing that early practitioners of Asatru, of modern Asatru, would lament was, like, they would try to justify their use of meat offerings as like, well, not really offering, animals or, war captives. It's the best we got. We'll pretend it's good enough and try to make a way to justify it or make it good enough. But the more we learn, and they didn't have access to the information we have access to now, the offering of a libation is the oldest and the root word of what a god is to our people since the very dawn of linguistics. So I think that's really informative and useful. Also, Heathen Man over on the side, conversation may have progressed since the last thing I saw. I don't know. Anyways, he mentioned that he was wearing his hammer at work the other day, and somebody else was as well. And they came at him and they were super excited about talking about the Norena Society and this and that. And he knows, how we feel on them. And that's true. We come by all of those things honestly. But I don't think that all of those people are bad actors or terrible humans. I think some of them don't get it. I think Mark Purrier is a great human. He's a really, nice guy. He's always been very friendly. I think he's fantastic as a person. And so there doesn't need to be, if we give the feeling that there's undue animosity there, I don't mean it that way. If that's how I'm coming off, I am passionate about it because I don't think they approach Asatru correctly. But I think that they're closer to people that have no interest in Asatru whatsoever. And I think that their interest in it might well lead them to us, which I think is the correct way to do Asatru, or the most correct way we have. And it has in the past led a lot of people here. So I think that's great that you ran into somebody who is about this. And I don't know if they are wearing the hammer because they are interested in the Norena Society, or if they're actively, worshiping our ancestral gods. That's fantastic if they are. And that's really cool. If he's again, I'm not following all the conversations, so I could be missing something over in the chat. But if it's interesting to him, it'd be awesome if he was encouraged to listen to the program. Either way, that's fantastic. And those kind of things happen more and more often when you wear your when you wear your hammer out and openly, at the places where you find yourself, at your job, if that's cool where you work, if religious expression of all people is first, if you don't, because of whatever reason you have, that's your life to figure out. If you live in a place of work where nobody expresses their religion because that's not appropriate there, that's fine. But there's a lot of people see opportunities where they can't wear it or shouldn't wear it, instead of all the opportunities where they should. Wear it to the gym, wear it to the store, wear it to, your kid's baseball game, wear it to whatever you go and you do. And these situations occur often, and that's kind of neat. I've been with our founder, Steve McNallen, times that we've traveled together or shared flights or whatever. I'm always surprised when he and I are out anywhere. He is much better at this than I am. He is a much more outgoing, just naturally effervescent person when he meets somebody. So he is very approachable, and he has a lot of really good conversations when people notice his hammer. I have some, but I think, look grumpy a lot of the times. And sometimes folks don't necessarily approach me with that. But I find that a lot of people do at like checkout lines or, counters where I'm paying with something. It kind of forces a one-on-one and they notice. And that's a really neat thing. And it's something that happens a lot now that didn't used to happen. But
If
yeah, I diverged.
No, actually, I wanted to say a little bit too. I think that a lot of the folks at the Narena Society are good folk, and I do believe that the they are honoring the gods, but our biggest issue is like a ecclesiastical misinterpretation on their part, and some of the changing of the lore is what we really focus on. And that could be an interesting topic for you guys to discuss. There, the books that they have kind of pumped out in a way are, impressive in the sense that they are pumped out. But again, there are some issues that we personally have with the way that they're structuring things and changing things and their interpretations of things. And, even in the beginning of one of his books, Purrier even says, it is up to us to go forward and set the formulation instead of having outsiders do it. And, we have been doing that. It's just, it became kind of like a secondary. And then, when you start to look at it, it's like there's things, problematic when they're switching all of the wells to Helgard, and that the gods go into the underworld like in a jaunt, all based off of, I think, a misinterpreted.
All right, so put a pin on that. Well, I suppose that's wrong. Let's pause for a second on that, because that is a point that does come right back to the story. I believe, if I understand correctly, in their conception of things, the gods are like daily traveling to Helheim to have their councils and to mete out the doom of men. And one reason that we don't agree, there's a variety of reasons, but one reason is, as you can see in the lore, or specifically in this poem, it's kind of a big deal. Like, the gods have met. They meet in Asgard to take counsel and to talk and to do things. They meet in Idavol. There's places that they meet in the heavenly realm frequently to discuss stuff. When this topic comes up and action needs to happen, Odin gets on his horse and has to go on this arduous journey and pass through obstacles and like deal with Garm and getting around him and this bloody breasted guardian of hell that doesn't let you in. We also have the other hell ride where you have to jump over the massive wall. It's like it's fortified, and it's not a easily permeable membrane, as it were. You can't just I'm gonna go hang out in hell today. it's a much more challenging thing. And that's part of why we think that. But the other thing that I want to say, just kind of, I don't want this to devolve into a complaint about the Norena Society, because I think that's more negative than we mean it to be, when I think that a lot of the people are perhaps, well, say perhaps, I think a bunch of people find themselves there very well intentioned. I think there's some people that have stayed there for a long time that were not necessarily well intentioned. And I think they have a way of casting a bad shadow on some of the others. Mark in specific, I think he's a really, good guy that means really well. And I have always and still do invite Mark Purrier to join the Asatru Folk Assembly. We would love to have you be part of what we're doing. We would love to do this together. We can't in the current setup, but if you ever decide that you want to, Mark Purrier, you're welcome to join us. And I also want to say this, that one of the big things, if you're talking to your friend and it comes up, besides all of the specifics and whatever else, I think if I could narrow it down to the biggest issue, is an approach based on understanding our gods or our religion through scholastic anthropology and like literary anthropology, if that's even a word. If it's not, I'm sure there may be a better word than that. Whereas our approach is one of building a relationship with our gods and trying to understand the lore through a lens of sincere devotional belief in our gods. And I think that the directionality of those two things lead to very different results sometimes. But I think that's where that is. But Svan, if you would like to take us back in, and maybe we'll pause when we turn the page. Let's pause after stanza 5. In retrospect, I should have waited till at the end of stanza 5.
Well, so here, Lord Odin, I love the forward road Odin, the earth resounded till the house so high of hell he reached. So he goes and descends into one of there are two primordial realms before the tripartite that fills up Gnungagup. And that is Muspelheim and Nibelheim. So he goes to Nibelheim, and in Nibelheim he finds the great, high castle of hell. The one he placed as the arbiter or adjudicator, of the ancestral lines and where they will go, and their access to Vergelmer, the well. So then rode Odin. This is stanza 4. Then Odin rode to the eastern door. There he knew well was the wise woman's grave. Magic he spoke and mighty charms, till spellbound she rose, in death she spoke. So here now, Lord Odin is really reaching into his the mythos of his power, and he wrenches this spirit out. And they don't really go into, is this spirit from say a human, though there's more of a lending to believe that she is an elder being, like a Jotun of some sort, and not a human. And that's based off of some other things she has said, like in the Volaspau. But she's also not within the confines. In essence, she's outside the Eastern Gate. And I don't know perhaps if the East part has a kind of more of a referencing to her being a Jotun, since that direction was kind of associated with them. But he speaks and brings her out, and she rises in this semi-state between existence and non-existence. And again, this is part of the poetics of the situation. Is there? It's not going to be just a kind of one for one. There is going to be a chance or a point in which she doesn't know who this is that's doing these great amounts of magic, and that's again to build up the suspense and eventually at the end the great reveal. And this is a common system that is done with Lord Odin, because he is again the Lord of ecstatic consciousness, and you don't gain that by just being able to trounce right in. And so she says, what is the man to me unknown that has made me travel the troublesome road? I was snowed on with snow and smitten with rain and drenched with dew. Long was I dead. So she says that she's endured the weather in her resting place, and now she's been wrenched from it. And again, that's just such an awesome kind of telling, the way that it's written. Very, very powerful. And we're turning over on that number 5. I don't know if you wanted to break from there.
Yeah, I think that's really cool imagery. Also, GW Farnsworth donating all the time. We appreciate you. 5 coffees is $25. Thank you very much for that. And Jake from Fresno bought us 3 coffees. $15 donation. Thank you, Jake. We appreciate you.
You sure it wasn't Jake from State Farm?
You're the one who types it in my private chat, and you did not indicate him working for State Farm. Is Jake the gay dude?
I don't know.
No, that's Progressive. Never mind. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's Flo and then the gay dude. Anyways, I didn't do their marketing. Don't judge me. Yeah, I think that's what I have, is acknowledging those. Other than the poem is really cool, the imagery is cool. It continues to be that way throughout the rest of the poem, and I think that we see elements of this poem in a number of other places in our lore. And that's good. I think the more times we go over different things in different ways or from different angles, the more it internalizes it. But this is some of the most poignant imagery, and I really like that a lot. That's all I got on it from right now.
Yeah, well, and it kind of segues in this spot, because the question and the answer, and the poem says Odin kvað. Odin speaks in 6. He says, Veitam, my name. I am Valtam's son. Speak thou of hell, for of heaven I know. For whom are the benches bright with rings, and the platforms gay bedecked with gold? So he states himself as the wanderer, Veitam. And it's odd that he goes even further to say that he is the son of the warrior or the fighter. Perhaps, again, to drive home credential legitimacy. Or, again, this could be a gleaning sense of really the understanding of Bor, the first Aus that, raises up the heavenly realm, his name being the bearer. But he simply asks, there's a celebration going on, and, there's a raucous sound coming from within the gates of hell. What are they preparing to celebrate? And the wise woman speaks. Here for Balder the mead is brewed, the shining drink, and a shield lies over it. But their hope is gone from the mighty gods. Unwilling I spake, and now would be still. So she says that the brewing that is taking place for the feast is being held in a a brewer's vat, and it has a shield over top of it, because it's in that state of being prepared, and that there is a great loss from the gods. And then she says, I'm unwilling to speak anymore, and I will lay now. And you'll see these two parts, the speaking of I'm not wanting to speak, and then the forcing by Lord Odin, which again is showing a presence of will versus perhaps a fate itself. And so there's this fate versus will dichotomy that's going on in the story, and it happens quite often.
One of the things that's a Odinic, hate to put it this way, that's an Odinic power. One of the magics that the All-Father is adept in is necromancy, in the sense of being able to compel the dead to speak. I believe that the Tyr rune is the rune that corresponds to that in his rune songs, that he knows one that a hangman will come down from the noose, down from the gallows, and be able to speak, and he can ask him things. So being able to consult with the dead by means of compelling them to do so is one of Odin's abilities that he has.
Yeah, the essence of what it would have an effect on the audience too is something that I think that when we're reading stories, we should consider that. Why is the necromancy or the death speech, and how it would impact the audience? This is deep, mysterious things that Lord Odin is so intimately connected with that it's just spooky.
I also think that Svan needs to do funny voices whenever he's reading anybody's character, like quotations. That needs to be a thing from here on.
Well, and sometimes when I read, so I don't read Baldrs draumar. This is kind of paralleling the story of the death of Balder, and it sometimes is added in whenever I'll read a story about it. And yeah, I always have to voice the Lord Odin and this kind of decrepit being who has been around and has seen 9 trees before Yggdrasil, which is a very interesting point. It's not mentioned in this poem, but that she goes so far back, and he is able to willfully pull her out of the seams of creation.
No, one thing I just wanted to mention, especially tonight when we got a short poem. So those of you who have been listening to our entire series on the Eddas so far may obviously pick up on this. Poetry and storytelling are such an essential element of our ancestors' Asatru practice. And I think their practice of a lot of things. And it's something that has largely gone by the wayside today. We're used to reading for utility or speed reading. We don't have a lot of poetic expression that's not explicitly musical. I think we still have that in society and song. And we have that in religious song, just not necessarily Asatru related. But the idea of poetry and dramatic storytelling is, I mean, for thousands of years was fundamental to our ancestors and would be, I don't know, would be cool to start seeing some of that reemerge within our culture. And it's one of those things that I would love to see some of that, but I can't just will that to happen. That's not my particular skill set, but it's neat if some of that were to develop. What it is kind of interesting on, and I'd encourage everybody to listen if they have a chance. Sveinbjörn Björnsson, the founder of the Asatru Félagið in Iceland. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He was very into that. That was a big part of his participation and approach to Asatru, was through dramatic storytelling, classical Icelandic poetry, and Rímur, which I joked with Svan about earlier. There are recordings of his doing different pieces of our lore in Rímur. And I would encourage all you guys out there to give that a listen. It's really cool if you can follow along with the actual bits of the Edda that he's doing, which you can on this website that we're currently looking on if you go to the right poetry on it. I think that's really informative, but just having it on and listening to the sound of the words and the cadence and hearing the voice of one of our exalted holy heroes, I think is beneficial too. So I would encourage folks to consume that if you can. And Nick might be so kind as to put up a couple of links at some point. But yeah, I just figured I'd interject that because it's such an important part of what we're going over.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that we do honor Sveinbjörn Björnsson. Some folks might not know that. But yeah, because of his, his connection and movements towards reemerging the gods to the folk. Unfortunately, I think it kind of slipped out of his hands, but we're doing research right now where apparently there were two folks, one that I met personally, Jorman Grinki. He took the Asatru Félagið in a different direction. I think more in the sense of like globalist politics or perhaps of that sense. But there was another who both of them looked towards for counseling, and he created his own folkish group in Iceland, and we're just currently delving into.
He was one of the founding fathers of the Asatru Félagið with Sveinbjörn. But we honor Sveinbjörn on July the 4th is his day of remembrance. And a pious man, a well-intentioned, devoted son of the Aesir. And as I mentioned, politics are circumstantial. They address the needs of a place, of a time, of a situation. Piety, religion, values don't. Those things can be applied in different ways to different circumstances, but with a common direction, a common orientation. And it's one of those things, I think that it's easy. Certainly, the Asatru Félagið in Iceland now is, and I would say this again, I don't address this. I made the distinction between religion and politics. They have made their religion very overtly political in a very leftist way, and they've made it very non-religious. At present, their current leadership is atheist, does not genuinely believe in the Aesir, not as gods, maybe as concepts or as whatever they conceive them as. I don't know how much that speaks for their members. It's hard to tell. But they've become very left-wing activist. The original founding generation of that was very folkish in a traditional way. but I think it's really easy to judge maybe some statements and some views expressed in Iceland when they're a completely homogenous society for almost all of their existence, including, very much so today, when we're looking at it from a modern American point of view, where it's, a very multicultural society that's very much a melting pot of lots of different groups of people. So I think that the perspective and the emphasis on certain things expresses itself really differently. Sometimes things are an activist issue that needs dealing with, whereas other times things are just the assumed norm and don't even need to be spoken on. So it's just something to think about and to try to judge people in a different place at a different time by their standards and not just knee-jerk reacting to them by the standards we deal with or the situation we find ourselves in.
The other thing that's worth just about the poem itself too, that I was just thinking about, was the titling of Veitam versus Odin. Odin is a title as well. The Aryan gods are gods, and we title them in ways that we could better understand their mysteries. Odin, again, is the wielder or the master of ecstatic frenzy and inspiration. And I think that all too often, it's not seen as much with the gods that are very, popular or, leaned upon at a great amount. But, when we look at like Forseti and the setting forth the law, it becomes pretty, self-evident. And of course, too, Baldur, the bold one. So understanding these titles, by the time that they were being spoken in Old Norse, these were the commonality titles that had become like synonymous with the power of a name, but they are still titles.
And all names originate in that way. That's the thing. Babies don't come into the world with a name tag. Their parents decide upon something to call them for a variety of reasons. When you encounter something or someone new that doesn't communicate to you verbally in that way, you place a title on it based upon your relationship with it, how you know it, what it does. You do that with the names of people, of races of people you encounter. It's interesting, the naming of different cultures by, an outside group looking out. We would name the different people we interacted with different things, just as they would name us different things based on how they saw us. It's one of the reasons I told you we were going to do this tonight, that we're going to break this up with these little rabbit trails, but I think they're important. It's one reason that I think it's really important that we define ourselves as Aryan, because that was what our people called ourselves to celebrate who we are in our identity. I think it's important that we call what we do Asatru, because that's what our people decided to call our relationship with our gods. We're very used to encountering that from other cultures and how they see us. And they apply different names like pagan or heathen or those things. That is a different group of people or a different faith describing us from the outside looking in, whereas we are identifying and describing ourselves as Asatru. And I think that those things are very important. But it's one of the reasons that in a pan-Aryan view, our gods are known by different names, different stories, different relationships in different places, because their relationship with people is developed differently over time in different locations. If you live in an entirely landlocked area, a god's focus on coastal waters has no meaning to you. So that god's value and meaning and expression is very different. If you live in a place that's very cold, or a place that's very warm, or a place that's forested, or a place that's, rolling steps, all of these things mean that over time your relationships with the gods take, slightly different forms. And I think we see that linguistically expressed. Other thing I wanted to point out, Jormundur Ingi, all of the Asatru folk assemblies Gothar for forever all come from the Gothic lineage of our founder, Stephen McNallen, except Thorgrim, who passed away recently. As an interesting side note, Thorgrim gained his ordination and became a Gothi before the Asatru folk assembly was ordaining Gothar. There was a window in the Asatru Free Assembly back in the late 70s and 1980s, where they were ordaining Gothar, and our founder, Stephen McNallen, ordained some people. Since 1995, when the Asatru Folk Assembly was founded, there was a period there that it took, kind of building, developing, figuring out what was what and where we were going, to where there wasn't the ordination of new Gothar for a time. But like I said, Gothi Thorgrim Odin, who just passed away recently. Sorry, I got to sort my spreadsheet different here. Apologize, guys. No, this is an interesting factoid, and I'm going to get at it here. I'm a little bit clunky with my playing with the technology here. Back in 1996, so that would be in June of 96, about a year and a half into the fledgling Asatru Folk Assembly, before we had started ordaining Gothar, at an event called the Gathering of the Gothar in Arizona. Jormundur Ingi was there, and he is the one who ordained Gothi Thorgrim. So there you go. Carry on.
So she says, I don't wish to speak. I want to lay. And then he says, no, you need to tell me. And in stanza 8, he says, wise woman, cease not. I seek from thee all to know that I fain would ask. So all of the arduous travel, the feigning, is not for naught. He's not just doing it simply for himself, but for others. Who shall the bane of Baldur become, and steal the life of Odin's son? The wise woman replies, Hoth, thither bears the far-famed branch, the mistletoe. He shall the bane of Baldur become, and steal the life from Odin's son. Unwilling I spake, and now would be still. So she names the majority of the compromising of the life of Baldur. So she's stating that it is this would be almost kind of like if nobody had ever heard this to our ancestors, but knew the dichotomy of these, of Baldur and Hother, or as it's written here as Hoth, is that they are brothers. So that would have been kind of a moment to be spoken of. And that's kind of the mic drop kind of, or I don't know, the scratching of the record in the poem, where it's not mentioned about exactly yet how Loki plays into all of this. But no, a brother shall slay another brother. And the far famed branch, again, the usage of mistletoe, particularly in Asatru and coming up soon in Yule, mistletoe, being seen as a sacred plant that we show no hostility before it, in remembrance to the fact that it was innocent in the machinations of the entire thing. So it's generally seen as a plant of goodwill. And Odin speaks because she says, I want to lay down. I'm unwilling. And he says, no. In 10, wise woman, cease not. I seek from thee all to know that I fain would ask. Who shall vengeance win for the evil work, or bring to the flames the slayer of Baldur? And now we're getting into some interesting points here. A lot of folks might not know it. The Asatru Folk Assembly has definitely covered some of this. A lot of folks might not realize who is about to be mentioned is one of the Austvanir, the mother of one of the gods, and is aligned with the gods. The wise woman speaks in 11. Rind bears Vali in Vestsalir, and one night old fights Odin's son. His hands he shall wash not, his hair he shall comb not, till the slayer of Baldur he brings to the flames. Unwilling I spake, and now would be still. So in this essence, we have kinslaying being brought to rest by kin. And this is an interesting thing. In essence, kinslaying is bad. But when the slayer is brought to rest, it doesn't have to be from someone outside of the family. And that is what happens here. So the Austvanir is Rindur, and she is lives amongst the gods. She is of the holy beloved ones, the Austvanir, and she is the mother of Vali through Lord Odin, as he is the progenitor, and he is the Lord of vengeance, and in particular, he is the one who keeps balance in immediacy. So the fact that he's, he washes his hair, and his hair he shall not comb. He's only one night old, and he enacts this vengeance. The idea of this really is emphasis on swiftness, not necessarily on the idea of like a baby, flipping out.
So a baby did not draw these pictures. Some ancient Icelander thought this was good artwork in this manuscript, and it's not. A lot of these pictures are comically not great. This imagery, I think, I have always thought is very, very powerful. We have very little source material for the holy god Vali. What we have, his glory, is encapsulated in a very few lines and in imagery and concept. That's what we have to build from. The image of him, one day old, still like dripping with gore of birth, not washing himself or cleaning the afterbirth off of himself until he accomplishes the vengeance that he's purposed to do, has always been such a visceral image for me. And in a strange way, like even more so after the birth of my daughter, she was born by C-section, and I tease her and I tease Mandy about talking when she was, dripping with gore ripped from her mother's viscera, just to get the imagery there. But I still have these pictures in my phone of her first coming into the world. And, those of us who are parents who've been there for the birth of our children, there is a goriness to their appearance at the time. And you wash that off and you clean them up and you bring them, you welcome them into the world of humanity, into the world of, clean yourself off, be one of the people, be part of things. He forgoes that until he's accomplished his mission. He's like, absolutely nothing else. This comes first. This gets done. Then we can worry about everything else. But the immediacy of that image being born while still covered in that initial state, going out and slaying who he needs to get vengeance, and then being able to clean up and go about his business. The purposefulness of that, just the immediate duty response to that is really informative. And I harp on it a lot because, like I said, it's one of the only things we have to understand and to build our relationship with Lord Vowley from. I think it can't be overstated, and it's very, very powerful in that way. And I think that when he has his Hoff, his mural might be off-putting. We'll see.
Well, and I mean, it gets even more so. I really do believe that Vowley is one of the most terrifying ouse that resides in the heavenly realm. It's scary to think about because, again, and some people who are of lore might this might tinge something real quick, but he later becomes a wolf and slays Loki's son. And I know that there's a lot of confusion, but another interesting lore tidbit for the Asatru Folk Assembly is that there a lot of misinterpretations in there about Loki having two sons, and one is turned into a wolf to kill the other. But that interpretation lends more to the possibility that it was Vowley himself who shape changes into a wolf and kills Loki's only son. And so that's an interesting rabbit hole to go and look into. But it is
Loki's son.
Yeah, I mean of Sigyn and of the heavenly nature. Sigyn also being an Austvanir, as opposed to Jotun horse. But the idea that once the kinslaying was done, and it was just you're not supposed to do it, and then after which, kind of it's on the table, and the vengeance lord comes immediately after you, and then turns into a wolf. And if we're like, how many days after his birth did this happen? I mean, this is mythos, not logos. It's about the fact that even being so young, he turns into a wolf, shape changes to enact vengeance on Loki.
It's literally and mythically, he hits the ground running.
Right.
That's the thing. There's not a stop. There's not a cool, there's different kinds of vengeance. There's Count of Monte Cristo, long game vengeance. And then there's immediate, this has got to get fixed now. And those are two really interesting and different expressions of writing righting wrongs. And I think conceptually, with the foreign creed of Christianity, we've really given vengeance a bad rap. It's a trope in movies or whatever, like, no, it's not about vengeance, it's about justice. Those things meant the same thing to our ancestors. That was how the scales were balanced, was by fixing the disruption caused by wrongdoing. Something worth, contemplating here too is, our people have a tendency to be obsessively rigid with a word or a phrase and not with the rightness of a concept. Yes, kinslaying is bad. It's not that you can never, ever slay a family member. It's that doing that in and of itself is extremely damaging and is a horrible thing. What's interesting here is, yeah, but they kept the vengeance of it within the family, of policing their own. And that's preferable to having an outsider come in and have to police your own family's, metastasization into something vile. There are times where there is conflict that other things, it's the best of a lot of really bad options, but it's the source of a lot of drama in our lore because it is such a negative circumstance. Very often in life, we're presented with multiple bad options and choosing the best from them. But this is an instance where these things are put into context. Yes, slaying of kin is bad, but if one of your kinsmen slayed another one of your, there's an impossible set of options, and sometimes you're left with picking the best of bad circumstances. So I think it's important that we pay attention to principle and to reason when we're applying some stuff. And I think it's worth mentioning this. We have a question. We have a number of questions that we'll get to when we're done with the story.
Yeah, we're
so
close.
And we're almost there. But Sarah asks, is there a modern day equivalent of kinslaying? And I feel the need to state the obvious, but yes, kinslaying. And I say that it's funny because of how the question is phrased, but that exists. And the principle of kinslaying can be brought back to much smaller stakes. No, you don't act against your kin. And when there's a strife in a family over whatever it might be, that is kinslaying writ small. That's not the slaying of a kin, but it's the violating of the intimate frith of that a family shares. And broken families due to that is a terrible curse that, again, there's no great answer. We hear horrible stories in the news from time to time about a son that has to kill his father because his father is horribly abusing his mother or whatever. There's no good answer in that circumstance. There's just the best of the options available. And I think that's similar to some elements of this story in comparison. But when we have families that break the frith with one another in irreparable ways, it's a similar phenomenon, but on a smaller scale. But betraying members of your family is horrendous, and it, the ultimate expression of that obviously is kinslaying, but sexual abuse within a family, those kind of things that are permanently damaging are on that same scale, but not exactly slaying. But that was one of the things, and it's one of the things that was interesting to me that was pointed out in Culture of the Teutons that I found kind of profound. When an outsider wrongs you, you can rebalance the scale by taking from their team, by, you know, them compensating from their pile of resources to your pile of resources. But when you're in a family, you share resources. So if your brother takes something from you and, you know, destroys that, you extracting that from your brother makes, like, it may shift things, but it's in a truly Asatru sense, it's taking resources from your left pocket and putting it in your right pocket. The smallest unit in Asatru isn't the individual, it's the family. And that's why it's such a vile and difficult circumstance, because strife amongst families has been common since the dawn of time. Understanding the damage that causes generationally, I think, is reflected in the severity of the things we're talking about.
Another thing too, as he is the instrument of vengeance or revenge for wrongdoing, and the Austvenir Rinder, or Rind, as it is written anglicized, she is like many of the Austvenir, beloved of the gods. She joins the gods, but is of Jotun blood and comes from the center world, and is kind of elevated up. And she is the Austvenir, or of ice and of the cold and of the the blasting wind and the crystallization of the land. And so, it always made me think of, like, I don't know where it came from or when it hit me, but I was like, yes, it's kind of like revenge is served cold.
Shakespeare.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was
served cold.
Yeah. But yeah, it just made me think of that immediately. And Rinder is one of the, very just really not well known Austvenir, and the understanding of the Austvenir versus the Ausinir is something that I think one day we should definitely talk about. But so the slayer, or she says, that till the slayer of Balder he brings to the flames, unwilling I spake, and now would be still. So this is that poetic repeat. And then it gives the first two lines for stanza 12, when Odin says, wise woman, cease not. I seek from thee all to know, that I fain would ask, what maidens are they who then shall weep and toss to the sky the yards of the sail? In here, this is just kind of an open-ended question because it immediately shifts. And this is talking about the death ship of Balder, and the sails, the creation of the sails, and who are they that are going to weep. Now, there's not a lot known on this. This is not known if this is referring to another part of the story, because we do have the story of Balder's funeral, and some people have suggested that it's Aegir's daughters, though I would lend to believe that it's actually connected more to Njordr's daughters, which again, very obscure and not very well known about, but is only briefly mentioned here and there. When they, weep as they form the sails of the ship. But it's this question that suddenly, because for people that might not understand this, the reason why it suddenly shifts here is because Lord Odin has revealed that he has foresight, because he knows that there will be maidens that will weep while they stitch the sail of Baldr's ship. And that's where he, in essence, the ruse slips. And that's when she immediately turns in 13 and says, Vegtam thou art not, as erstwhile I thought. Odin thou art, the enchanter of old. And then Odin speaks, No wise woman art thou, nor wisdom hast. Of giants 3, the mother art thou. And the wise woman speaks, Home ride, Odin, be ever proud. For no one of men shall seek me more, till Loki wanders, loose from his bonds, and to the last strife the destroyers come. And that's an interesting part there too, because if we're looking at the stories in series, it is not known that. So Lord Odin comes down to speak to the Volva to find out if there's any way or to what degree Baldur is going to die. Baldur is not dead yet, but now Lord Odin has revealed that he knows that there will be maidens that weep that create his sails, and then she in turn says that he will be Loki will be loosened from his bonds. These are two events that have not taken place yet, so this is like high forethought, or might in their beings going against each other. It is referenced to that perhaps she counsels Loki, but from the verse itself, I mean, it could add to the fact that she is against the gods and she is angry at Lord Odin for willfully removing her, but it doesn't outright say that Loki is free from his bonds and then he comes to Helgard to gather those decrepit souls that had to cross Gjöll, the river Gjöll and the river Slith. He gathers up those lost and broken souls that were never allowed to join with their ancestors, and then he takes the ship and he sails up. It never says anywhere that he seeks her counsel or that she is with him, but it's people have thought about it, but I really don't think, just based on lore, it doesn't stand. But based on how angry she is towards Lord Odin, I can see
I don't. I'm gonna cut in just because it's relevant. It does say of giants 3, the mother art thou, and then she brings up Loki, and she only answers the questions really that Loki could have told her. I think it's Angrboda. She's hanging out in Hel, or in Niflhel with her daughter Hel, and she's the mother. I know technically Jormungandr, Hel, and Finrod are not giants, but she's a giant, so they're half giant. So it could be Angrboda. And that would explain why, she doesn't like Odin, and, she's going to root for Loki.
Well, yeah, and the interesting thing is giant is not the word that's really used. It's the word is Thursa, and a Thursa is of Jotun in descendancy, but is de-evolved into a thing of malice or of ill intent. And I do think that's interesting. The only thing is like, again, where is Angrboda? Or, in the sense she is slain, or if there's any references to that. That's where I would wonder on that one as well.
She's hanging out in her daughter's house, and she just decides to trick Odin into thinking she's a wise woman.
Right. Well, she's risen from the ground. He speaks her out of the ground.
It's a long game. She's just playing a plot. I don't know.
Well, no, and I'm not
No,
saying
no.
that
I mean, there's no right answer. There's no.
no, and I'm
You
not
ain't got
saying
much to
that
go off of.
that's not. I'm not saying that's not correct at all, because again, this would lend to Angerboda. For those who don't know and who are listening, this is the mother of Fenris Wolf, of Jormungandr, the world serpent, and of course Hel. And those placements in the story have a significant effect. Hel, the least threatening, is placed in dominion over death and the processes of the souls going through and joining with the ancestors. But she is death itself, the terribleness of decay and illness and all that is. Jormungandr is in the middle, and he is threatening, but it's more of a neutrality. So we have the least in the lowest place, the neutral kind of in the middle, and then the absolute most dangerous walks right into heaven. And there's a lot of analogous wisdom in that, the idea of it just inviting the dangers of that. So I'm not saying that. I think that has great possibility there as well. I need to. It's immediately making me want to go and look at where she speaks about how she was living in a cave and watched the 9 trees before this tree, referencing Yggdrasil. So that's an interesting, the mother of all foul, hexa, or sorceresses, if you will. But she tells him, go ride home, and until Loki wanders loose from his bonds. That's the big one. And to the last strife, the destroyers come. And that ends the poem. Again, really powerful, even too when you consider the fact that a lot of it is repetitive intro outros. It still packs a punch. It's concentrated. And I was reading it earlier, and I was like, oh yeah, I jogging my memory again, and it was just like, oh, this is so good. But yes, and it's worth noting too that, I mean, another thing that we do that I don't think a lot of folks in maybe older Asatru or what have you is the piety and devotion towards Lord Balder. You don't generally find a lot of people who claim to be devoted to the gods giving devotion to Lord Balder. And if you go to Baldershof, there is the mural there, and there is a key conduit between the devotion, the piety, the strength that we give is in essence filling the horn that Balder drinks from, so that when he returns, he is filled with that. So that was done on purpose. On the horn is piety and strength and devotion. Again, for the essence of the return. So the gods don't die; they shift into other levels or with significance. Again, Lord Balder goes into the realm of the dead, and he goes in to the place farthest away from the creation of time and farthest away from the gods. But this gives him an advantage based on the ending in Ragnarok, and allows him to return. And many people speculate that perhaps Lord Odin saw all of that as part of the totality of the machinations. I mean, I would definitely think, it's Lord Odin. I'm not saying that he can or can't do anything, but I would definitely lean on the can heavier than the can't. So I don't know.
All right, so we've got some stuff. First, Chris in Ohio donated $30 to the BNS Fund. Thank you very much, Chris. We appreciate it. Got a number of questions lining up. Where are we at to the start here? Okay. Wolf Throne says, would you say the piety and devotion Hindus have with their gods can serve as a good example for how Asatru should be interacting with the Aesir? Svan.
Yes, in context. I mean, we know that the faith forms that developed into Hinduism come from the Arya, and they have the tripartite. Again, another telltale sign that they are Arya or they are Aryan, and but these devotions that developed over time, I think, are unique to them, but that we can learn from them and formulate, I think, our own verbiage, because sometimes the prayers that are done by, like in Hinduism, are I think a lot of Western readers, when they read it, don't know or understand why the level of piety is so intrinsic to, like, even to the creation of the self. And I cannot see without you. I cannot hear without you. I cannot smell without you. And I think that this is not a bad thing at all. I'm just saying that there needs to be a development of language within our culture in order for us to truly understand or get to that level of meaning that they have from, their source. But I do think it's worth reading and studying.
So I looked at the question a little bit differently, and not in the sense of like needing to read or study their stuff or even ape their practice, but the depth of their piety. That's the thing. When you absolutely, their piety should be extremely informative to us. They are very pious, and I say that. The examples that I am aware of and the good examples of their piety are extreme piety. And I think that different races of people express piety in different ways, not only with different language, but with different kind of action, with different tone, in a different way. But the level of piety, absolutely. You have such a deep devotion to their gods. And modern Asatru, due to the conditions that we live in and the state of soul sickness amongst our folk, the true deep piety has been slower than we would have liked to develop. It's at a higher and better place now amongst more Asatru than ever before in the modern period. It's a beautiful thing when you see it, and it's a sad thing when you notice the lack of it. We talk a lot about the soul sickness of our folk on here, and that's one way that it is really expressed. Most often, one of two things precipitate people to become Asatru, or I guess have over the almost 60 years of the modern period of Asatru. Currently, we have a lot of atheists that are not used to the idea of piety itself that embrace Asatru. And so that's a slow build to develop something that's never been a part of how they define themselves. But we also have a current of, people that have come here specifically out of damage that they felt being pious in other faiths. So there's a tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater and think everything that, they did when they were a Christian, they need to abandon and do the opposite of when they become Asatru. And that's been something that we've had to deal with too. And these are all responses to trauma. And it's part of healing our people to get past that. Hindus in India don't have that same history of modern atheism and of the cultural domination of Christianity for so long. So they come to piety towards their gods in a much more direct way than often our folk do. But yeah, that level of piety and that expression of piety is really, it's beautiful to see. And it is something that, the intensity of that should be felt by our folk. The way that we demonstrate it might be different. It comes to mind, there's a guy, I don't want to mention his name, but he was a guy that was really prominent in different modern Asatru and Asatru related circles. And it was very funny that, he quit the AFA and, all this different drama that we have within Asatru circles of people breaking off over small things and just petty differences and whatever. And he lamented, I saw on like a social media post after he had quit, some grumpiness about, some magnificent god to a Hindu deity or a statue to a Hindu deity. And like, man, why can't Asatru ever do stuff like this? This would be, we should do these things. This is awesome. Well, you can't do that if there's no unity. You can't do that unless there's a critical mass of people willing to devote themselves and their resources towards making things happen. And that's the sad situation we find ourselves in, is a lot of our folk want us to have beautiful things, want us to have amazing and wonderful things, but don't want to be part of making those things happen. And that's sad. We could accomplish so much more if all those people were with us. But the happy thing is we're able to accomplish so much more now than ever before, because so many people have come home to the ICER, to Asatru, to the AFA. So that's been really beautiful. But we need more of that. And we'd be way further ahead if more people decide to be part of what we're doing and to help. So hopefully, and we've already seen that this show in particular has brought a lot of people home. So the more of our folk we can bring home, the better we can accomplish the things that we set out to. A question from Gothi East. I'll hear your Gothi and Witan Svan. What is the AFA's official stance on the giantess Thok, who refuses to weep for Baldur? Is she Loki in disguise? Svan, what are your thoughts?
In the Gylfaginning, I believe it is mentioned straight out that it is Loki. And it's worth noting that, again, don't follow mythos is not meant to be, entirely logical. The idea, again, is that Loki is ousted out as the perpetrator and is not going to be seen as one that will weep at all, but is left out of the equation. But in that malice, he changes himself into this feminine being and then doubles down just to make it not happen. Let me see here. I believe it's right here in the Prose Eddas. Thok will weep waterless tears for Baldur's bale fair, living or dead. I loved not the churl's son. So that is a huge bite towards Lord Odin. By this time, Loki has manifested into his true nature. He's been malignant and is now just completely filled with evil. And let hell hold what she hath. And men deem that she who was there was Loki Laufrson, who hath wrought most ill amongst the gods. So in the Gylfaginning, verse 49, it is stated. I think that's lending enough, but also on top of this, he's not in the equation and gets to double hook around and still be part of the stopping of Baldr's, return. And it's when we're talking about the gods in a spiritual sense outside of, say, a lore context, this is just, again, a re-emphasis of that malice and the inevitability of it. The idea that there was no sense of return till after Ragnarok ever, but this plays out. The lines are hardened now. There is the chaos and the evil versus the order and the good. So yes, I'm a believer that Thok is Loki, mainly just because it's stated.
Side note, his name, its name means thanks in Old Norse and I believe in modern Icelandic. Random factoid.
Yeah, and I believe that's kind of a poetic joke. Kind of like when if somebody like does something terrible and is like, "You're welcome." It's like,
and that's kind of how it reads to me too. I can't say that with authority, but these characters in the lore are not named haphazardly. Yeah, absolutely. She is, Loki in disguise. If for some reason I am wrong and she is not Loki in disguise, she's absolutely one of Loki's agents. And the relevance to me is the same. Something important to restate as many times as possible. Asatru is not about belief in Norse mythological cosmology. Asatru is about being true or loyal to the Aesir. It's not just about realizing that the world functions or our existence functions in those terms. It's about an active loyalty and being on the side of the Aesir, the side of the forces of order against the forces of chaos. So she's on the other side of that line regardless, but yes, she's Loki in disguise. Arminius return. Matthew, how long has it been since you were a Christian? 24 years, which had a really good date to when that, to when I finally broke from Christianity. But about 24 years. It was sometime in the winter of between 2000 and 2001, I believe. But yeah, so this entire century thus far. And another thing, okay, I'll get to that a little bit later then. All right.
That's an interesting question, though. I just, immediately, like, to what purpose is that? I just, interesting in and of itself. I know that most folks that come into Asatru come in through, I call it the rift. Very few are raised Asatru, and I think your daughter and my children are lucky in that sense. But most of us do come from somewhere else or some other faith, and just kind of a short question and then dropped off.
It's something to think about, but I've noticed some of that's because we're old. A lot of the newer people coming in come from atheism, like things that
true. Yeah.
I assume to be true and normal are not necessarily the case for a lot of our younger members, and I was talking to a guy at Freyr's Harvest Feast that expressed this, which is a few years younger than us. There was a cultural shift that happened in this country to where it was a fairly religious country, to where there was a really strong church tradition for a really long time. And over, during my lifetime, that has dropped off tremendously. And atheism is more the default than Christianity is at this stage of the game in the United States, I'd say. And that used to not be the case. Used to be people weren't necessarily very religious, but if they had to say something, there's some kind of Christian. I think, certainly more than I've ever seen, there's some kind of atheist instead these days. So I don't know if that's, it's just kind of anecdotal from what I see around me, but yeah. So Finn Wraith wants to know, could Ragnarok be metaphorical for some real world catastrophe? Svan, take this, please.
Ragnarok again. Yes, it is. Its application is perennial. Mythos, and the power of mythos is that its application can be eternal in its expressions. So if you were to say, hey, is there any war in history that could be aligned with Ragnarok? Or is any war in the future, perhaps one that we're looking at down the barrel of right now, could this be analogous with Ragnarok? In many ways, yes. But if we're talking about literalism too, there are some, and I have a lending towards this as well, is that I do believe that some of the details outside of it being perennial is what defines Ragnarok. And of course, that is the Fimble Winter. And because of what Alice Hirgo, they just said it because we're old. I remember when the climate crisis, green is the new red guys, back in the late 70s and early 80s, were talking about the most likelihood of an ice age being the end that brings an end to mankind. And then, eventually they went into the global warming and into the acid rain and the ozone holes and all of that, and kind of shifted towards warming. It's not unplausible to think of it that way, but I do believe that there is truly truthful insights within the lore. I do not believe the lore is strictly like a Bible, but that these stories are passed down and spoken of, and then were written down to survive the drought of Christianity in a kind of a seed form. And so that would be my biggest thing is, does the Fimble Winter proceed? But again, your application of that destruction can be applied, and it's okay to be applied in other situations as well.
So we get this a lot, and I get that it's hard to wrap your head around. Our myth cycle exists within mythic time. There are constant cycles, and the mythic cycle, the way that it is described, exists within one of those cycles. The events in our mythology have happened, are happening, and will happen, because a lot of cyclical things repeat themselves. Understanding gods that exist outside of our temporal understanding of how everything works are best displayed in different contexts and different seasons of their existence. All of those seasons are relevant and existing. Simultaneously, Balder is the brightest in Asgard, he is slain and in Helgard, and he is returned and triumphant, post Ragnarok. All of those things have happened, will happen, are happening. And it's hard to wrap our head around because it's not really the point. There's a lot of, certainly you see commonality in small cycles. There's cosmic cycles, there's galactic cycles, there's planetary cycles, there's national cycles, there's cultural and personal, and there's cycles on all these levels that we can see. And a lot of that, sounds like gobbledygook, and it's neither here nor there, other than to say we recognize commonality in something that people have always done when they see mythic expression of cycles is, okay, well, this, things are really bad. Ragnarok's right around the corner. I think that we're specifically primed to that with messianic millennial philosophy with Christianity. That was one of the things in Christianity. The Judaic worldview of a start and a stop time for life on earth and a messianic deliverance into whatever their new heavenly existence is was very much always conceived of in terms of chronological specificity. So the generation of like the original disciples of Jesus, they thought, okay, cool. Like within our lifetime, Jesus is coming back. We're going to hang out in heaven and tell Yahweh how awesome he is for eternity. It's like, cool. This is happening like next week. And they thought that very sincerely. And then, the next generation, like, surely any day now, it's been long enough. I see the signs. Barbarians are rising outside the city. Nope, this is what they talked about. This is the beast and the whore of Babylon, and it's all going to happen. And this is happening tomorrow. It didn't. And then they went through a period where they looked to the future a little bit. And every new century that come around, just because we recognize numbers and patterns, and passing a new century is makes you take note of time in 100-year chunks. They would expect like, nope, Jesus is coming back this, New Year's Day. We're gonna celebrate New Year's in heaven. That's what's going down. And every time it didn't happen. And then they projected, okay, certainly year 1000. This is the apocalypse. We got to get ready. Let's make it happen. That was very evident in Rome and the Papal States in Italy. And it was really important with the Carolingian dynasty and with Charlemagne at the time. He thought for sure, this was going to be a thing they were setting up to. This was going to happen at the turn of the 2000s. We're going to get prepped and ready for this. It's coming. And it didn't. And so you see this in modern, there's so much end times prophecy stuff by Protestant Christianity. That's a really popular theme because every new thing is like, nope, the signs are all here. And I don't say that to be rude. I think in all of our lives, when we experience the worst thing we've ever experienced, okay, can't get worse than this. This is going to be the end because we go by our level of experience. If you were in Rome and the eternal empire has crumbled and the Goths, the Visigoths are coming over the walls and like Vandals are coming in, Alaric's coming, it's done. Cool, surely this is a wrap. This is end times. And every time you see a new thing, there's a world war. There's a second world war. Oh, wow, there's nuclear bombs now. Every new thing is a new opportunity to cast that in a different light or on a bigger or more epic scale. And I think we all see those things. And it's easy to recognize patterns. And it's like a lot of Nostradamus's quatrains. you can play a game with those, and I don't mean, again, to be disrespectful, but you can play a game with those and put that in any time and any circumstance and challenge somebody to make the pieces fit. You can make the pieces fit for anything you want. The king in the north does this thing to the nation in the south, and then the bear from the east devours the king. And with those kind of things, you can apply that to the further we go in the progression of information that we have access to a number of people. You can find that wherever you look, if you look hard enough and you're into doing that enough. As a kind of a side note, as a Jehovah's Witness, briefly in 99, 2000, 98, 99, 2000, therein, it was the new system was going to happen any day now. They were so into it. They had all these really in-depth prophecies from the book of Daniel, and they'd done all these calculations, and end times was going to, the generation at the start of the tribulation was going to be there to see the second coming of Jesus. So they had it figured. The people who were alive during the First World War, because the First World War was when Satan was cast out of heaven, and that's going to be the start date, and then time and half a time or whatever I think it said in Daniel. There's this big prophecy built around that generation of people will still be alive. But then in the 90s, you started to see like, wow, these people are, even people who were just born at the outbreak of the First World War, these people they're getting up there. They're in their 80s or in their 90s or over 100. Nope, all of those people are dead, and it still hasn't happened. So they got to recalculate. And with them, I think that's like the fourth or fifth recalculation they've done. That's not what we do. That's not relevant to Asatru. The cycles of birth, becoming, death, rebirth, and all of those things, we see them. It's one of the ways that we relate to existence. But our gods are eternal in at least as much as we can understand eternity. They're the gods of our folk and of our race, and cycles happen and continue to happen. The cycles help us to understand them, but to try to link that story with some kind of millennial end times prophecy isn't, I think that's misguided. Go ahead, Svan. You're muted.
Sorry, I was gonna say I'm seeing some chatter over on the side, and I wanted to bring up a couple of points. One of the big gripes that's going on is about not spiraling out into a doomsday kind of thing that Christianity and Judaism and so on kind of carry. But there's some interesting points to note. Aryan religions always have a war in the beginning, a war at the end, and that existence in between. But the difference lies in the fact of whether the religion is warrior, of a warrior spirit, or of, say, like a death cult or a lamentation spirit. I think that's very, very different. We know that, we live in the wolf age will come. But we just said, I mean, that application of those titles are perennial. So the idea is that the struggle exists and which way you take it. If you lament, if you think that, the end times are coming and we'll finally be saved from the terribleness of living, versus the warrior mythos is the end times are inevitable and we must, keep building, keep going stronger and better and harder at things. There's a vast difference between the two that should be noted. A lot of people will immediately default to the idea that Snorri influenced much of his Christian views and into the Eddas, and there is some truth to that. But it is worth noting that, like, pre Hellenic influence of Judaism and Christianity didn't have a lot of this. Most of their stuff comes from mortal things, like the siege of Gidon is what eventually leads to the concept of Armageddon or Armageddon. But it wasn't until they reached the Hellenicized or became the Hellenicized Jews in Turkey and in Lebanon and stuff like that, that they started really absorbing Aryan concepts. The Trinity is one, the idea of the great battle at the end, and a lot of that. There's a reason why Revelations is written in Greek and not Aramaic. It's because that influence is super pronounced. So I don't think that doomsday is strictly Christian. It's just that the concept of the people who observe that doom is different. There's all Aryan faiths have a tripartite. All Aryan faiths have an upper, middle, and lower world. And remember, Christianity did not have an upper, middle, or lower world until way later. A lot of people don't realize that, but it was the many Satans in Judaism. There was multiples. Living on earth with humans on this existence. It wasn't till later when they were kind of encapsulated in an underworld. There was no final fight at the end. There was a fight in the beginning, or at least a casting out, which isn't really even a fight. But the idea of the big battle at the end is definitely, I think, another Aryan influence. So it is really about the way that you, as a people, perceive the doom. And again, this is cyclical nature. This is the eternal becoming dawned out of, chaos, and then being formulated, and then eventually it has to, or it doesn't have to be, but it is torn down in the great struggle. That the thing that makes something eternal is the threat of it not existing again. So super important. I just mentioning that with some of the chatter on the side that's worth noting is, and I don't think that we as Asatru should be like, don't get spiraled into these doomsday death cult kind of mindsets. It's worth noting where it is viable in our theology, but where it is also where we are different and where we view things differently.
So I want to address something to Arminius Return in the chat room. He's been real active over there. He's got another question coming up in the queue. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you being active and, expressing, your thoughts and being part of the conversation over on the side. What I would invite you to do as a different perspective or a different way of thinking, because the stuff that you're saying isn't, and the way that you're saying it isn't uncommon. It's not something that a lot of people, haven't done or haven't thought. And I get that, but there's a tone in there, and I'm not trying to project it on you. I don't presume to know exactly where you're coming from on it, but the tone of our gods being somehow personification of natural phenomenon and like a poetic way of describing the natural world is, I think when people say that, sometimes they mean something deeper. On the surface of it, it appears to a lot of us that practice our religion in a very devotional way, like a form of atheism, like it's a suggestion the gods are not real. They're just a poetic way of describing natural circumstance. And that's the way that scholars have traditionally related to non-Abrahamic faiths, is by suggesting that our ancestors are these, primitives that grunt and beat on sticks and make up, magic spirits to explain things they don't understand. Yet the Jews and the Arabs and the Christians are able to magically, their God's the real one, but everybody else is just a confused savage. And it's not the case. Our ancestors were incredibly smart people. They had the same brain capacity that we do as modern humans. They don't need to make offerings and devote worship in temples and hofs to pretty ways of describing natural things. So I would challenge you to, what would it look like if our gods are real entities that have been part of the gift cycle with our folk since the dawn of time? And if our ancestors grew to understand them by relating them to natural circumstances that highlight their power or highlight their glory in a certain way. The directionality of that's really important. If your starting point is that the Aesir must and do exist, therefore let's understand how our ancestors related to them. Certainly we see, like your point about Baldur, we understand the similarity between Baldur's return and the sun as being a beautiful expression of that. And so we celebrate Baldur at midsummer. But it's not because Baldur is the sun. It's because we see that natural thing as a beautiful reminder or symbol of Baldur is not a symbol of the sun. The sun is a symbol of Baldur. And the directionality of that matters tremendously. Thor isn't an explanation for thunder. Thunder helps us understand the majesty and the might of Asatru. And those are I would like you to, if you would, I invite you to think on the directionality of those things. Maybe it would inform what you do or how you think, but I hope it would inform the way that you perceive how we think in relation to, the direction we're coming from. And so I say that not just to you, but everybody else who's listening, because it is a very common place to start from. And so I think that's worth mentioning. So one of your questions, Arminius Return question, could the stories of the gods be astral theology? I'm not sure what you mean by that term. Svan, are you picking up what he is laying down in that question?
Yeah, yes, I am. And so astrotheology is, again, kind of what you were just talking about. Instead of, say, natural forces within the biomes of the earth, now we're talking about celestial forms and those movements taking place. And you see that a lot when we talk about like Gunungagap and the idea of like the great void in the center being perhaps space. But it is important to consider the directionality, as Alshergoli said, is that, for instance, when the story of Thor drinking from the horn drops the level of the sea, it is the gods' actions, the gods' interface with the middle, with the middle world, that which is material, that which is physical, that which has causality. It is their interaction that creates those differences. So could there be a cosmological effect of the machinations of the gods and of the forces that are I do believe so, but I don't think it's the other way around. I don't think that astral or cosmological effects are simply the gods in maybe scientific titling or what have you. And I don't think that's what you're saying, but I mean, just from my very, very minute understanding of astrotheology, so I can't speak heavily, but it just seems like that those correlations kind of become the merging point between natural phenomena and divine phenomena. And, we in the Astrofolk Assembly definitely look at the willful manifestation of action that the gods and other forces partake have effect in the middle realm. All that flows in from the east and from the west and from above and from below have an effect in the material. How far that goes out is something that I've pondered often. There is clearly life here, but beyond here is one that I ponder about. But I don't know. Can the gods do things in the astral and the cosmic? I believe so. And I think that our lore, or really too, our gods are not strictly confined to the earthly state, that they can very well, if we take to the stars and start pressing our expansion into the heavens, we will take our gods and bear that piety to them with us, no matter how far we kind of go. Because again, at what point is Ymir the earth? Yes. Is Ymir the cosmos? Yes. It's that hard to wrap around the application of the perennial truth of mythos, is that it grows bigger and it can shrink smaller and all apply at the same time. But yes.
All right. Switching paces for a second, Finwraith asks, what do you think about this stuff between Iran and Israel happening right now? Could this turn into some bigger worldwide conflict? Yes, of course it could. Svan, take it away from here, and I will be right back, guys.
Okay. Well, remember too, folks, our church doesn't, promote or condemn any, particular forms of politics and governance, but your faith should exude from you to exemplify the way you wish to govern. And we have one of our holy lords is the Lord of law and governance. But when we're looking at this, and this is just me kind of also speaking from a personal, we're in this situation right now where things can get, and I, being in former military, and seeing and being a part of some pretty big foreign activities, if you will. We're sitting at the point right now where we have a president who is completely non-visible, but doesn't really even exist. We're in the biggest proxy war that we have been with Russia since the Cold War, except I think this feels far more tangible than even back then when I was growing up. So, we have that. We have this situation that grows too as Israel is stepping outside of its borders. Not only is it crunching on people within its borders, now it's stepping into their neighbors to get things. And Iran, sent these missiles, and I've gotten conflicting reports based on what I saw. The Iron Dome isn't working. The Iron Dome is working. So I really feel like we're kind of left in the dark, and that doesn't give me a great foothold to make a super educated guess on how things are going. I mean, I know that an American strike group was moved over there about a week ago before all of this. And it's just, it's getting very, very tense. I think, between Ukraine and the Middle East and Israel and ultimately to the ever waiting snake in the corner, China and Taiwan conflict that could brew. And a lot of times these things happen in conjunction simply because of opportunity, so we saw it with Iraq and then Afghanistan, is that oftentimes conflicts breed more conflicts because it creates an opportunity to spread resources. And so, yeah, I'm very concerned, I guess would be the term, in relation to, just based off of my knowledge in the military, where these things are going when countries are kind of stepping over borders and hitting people, and then there's a retaliation strike. But Iran had to do that. Then I think it wasn't just Lebanon too. Of course, they did do a strike in their country, hitting, I believe he was the head of Hezbollah, and hitting his bunker or safe house or what have you. And Iran has done this before, even when Trump killed Soleimani. He was in Iraq, and they took that opportunity, though, and struck him while he was outside of his country. And they sent missiles to a base that I had visited numerous times, Al-Assad Air Base. And, I think that how much of this is saber rattling, who knows? But there's a certain point where if it keeps going, it could get very spicy very quick.
Yeah. There is a misnomer that as a church, we all of a sudden can't ever talk about anything that is remotely political. That's not true. But it's not our primary focus, and those aren't our people. So it becomes a little bit of an extraction at some point. Could it turn into something? Absolutely. Am I concerned about us sending our sons over there to be in that conflict, in that situation? Yes, I am. I could see that occurring at some point. I hope it doesn't. And I know everybody here, a lot of our listeners get really wrapped up in this, particularly because it deals with groups of people that a lot of us have entrenched thoughts on. What I will say is, suffering is bad, and suffering of non-combatants is worse. We don't want to see suffering in general, and we especially do not want to see any suffering of non-combatants. That's terrible. I think that's always terrible. I think it's just worth, considering and being aware of. We think that across the board with living things, and it's part of what defines our people. How we deal with other folks, how we deal with animals, how we deal with the living world around us, and with other things that experience pain, suffering, joy, emotion. Causing pain and suffering is a bad thing. Clashing between warriors that are in there and both are actively engaged in that struggle is a little bit different than a lot of the really ugly things that happen in modern warfare. And just as a point of, it's worth being said, suffering's bad, and the suffering of innocence is especially bad. And always wish that was not the case. And, one of the sad things about war in this day and age is there's always some of that. There's very seldom a situation where there's none of that. So collateral damage is really bad. And I think with urban situations in urban populations of the world, that tends to happen much more than I think folks realize. The next question. So this is again from Arminius Return, suggesting I believe that they are real, talking about our gods, that they represent the mindset of the folk. Are you familiar with the idea of egregore? I am. Svan, are you familiar with that concept?
Just off the top of my head, it is the concept that the gods are created from or tailored to a very specific group of people due to their consciousness of them. Is that correct?
I think there's a lot of variance on what different people may mean by that term. If I'm following him in the chat, and my understanding of egregore is it's a thought form that gains a life of its own or an existence based on the collective will or pool of mental energy of the people who are giving rise to it, for lack of a better term. And the closest analogy within Asatru that I'm aware of to that concept is the idea of like a personified Hamenya. And I think there's something to that, though I don't think it is an entity. I think there is a collective well of luck formed by groups of people due to their association and ritual acts within that association. But it's not the same as a thought form come to life. But I'm loosely familiar with the concept. The times that I have encountered it have seemed to be like I promise I don't mean any disrespect when I say it. I don't know a better way to put it across. It seems like a fancy atheism, like adding cool imagery to not really believing in the sentient external existence of a god or a being that you were in communion with. And again, different people may mean something different when they say it. It's hard when there are things that, when you talk about spiritual things or metaphysical things, vocabulary tends to fail to convey exact meaning or precise things. It's I think it's very important to approach Asatru, or I think any religion, from a very simple but very genuine place, and to build on that simplicity. I think we don't allow ourselves mentally or emotionally often enough to drop our preconceptions, let our guards down, and be open to spiritual experience. So I think a lot of people have to go through a process where they intellectualize and rationalize and come up with really complex thoughts and theories to try to, facilitate that process or merge their worldview with the practice of a particular religion. And I think sometimes it's a starting point. A lot of the time it's an ending point, or it's a static point of where people are. I don't I don't fault those deeper thoughts once you establish relationship on a simple but genuine, just heartfelt way. I think you can build on that. And I think you can probably build on that infinitely with more specialized way of expressing it, a very complex philosophical or theological lexicon to make it interface with other faith systems or other philosophies. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but fundamentally, Asatru is about relationships. It's about the gift cycle. It's about building a relationship between the folk and the gods, between yourself, your family, and our gods, and maintaining that through consistent sharing in that gift cycle. We don't have, most of us, and certainly starting from, the earliest childhood, we don't form relationships based on philosophical constructs or esoteric theories or any of those things. We form relationships by empathy and projecting that empathy onto beings that share our experience in some way. And we build relationships through genuine expression of emotion. We build enmity if we have expressions of hate or rage or anger at something or hostility. We build a relationship that way, or with love and warmth and a familial feeling with things that we care about and that we cherish and that we build a loving relationship with. Those things aren't stuff we think out or we analyze. They're things that you do. And I think that our folk are best served starting there and building from it, as opposed to trying to start out by some very complex intellectualization of it. Because I think when you do that, you miss some of the beauty of a very simple relationship. And I think at whatever point you get to, our gods are gods. And whatever the highest evolution of our mortal ability to analyze and dissect philosophy and esoterics and theology, as great as our greatest geniuses of that, they are far below the wisdom and understanding of our gods. I don't think we impress them with how extremely hyper-analyzed our situation is. I think it's far more meaningful to have genuine devotional worship of our gods and build a relationship that way. Again, I'm not one of the gods. I can't pretend that I know what that's like or I understand existence. All I can do is project my experience and hope that it relates in some way to theirs, or more likely, know that they understand where I'm coming from in my experience, and that the genuineness of a simple relationship impresses upon them, at least they, makes them feel good. It's like if you think about a child that does a kindness towards you, not one of your own children, but any child. It's nice and it makes you feel warm and good inside when a little kid comes up and gives you something or gives you a hug or says something nice to you. Not because of a depth of philosophizing about it, but they see you, they think you're cool, and they want to come up and say something nice and give you something that they made and tell you it's a giraffe, even though they drew, 3 legs and some kind of, globule on it. The simple expression of, hey, I was thinking about you, I did something nice because I really think you're cool or look up to you or feel nice towards you. that's the most meaningful thing to me. And it's far more meaningful than somebody who relates to me in a contractual way, in a business way, in an analytical way. Somebody who just comes up, even if they're mute and can't express it, if they're, retarded, if they're whatever it is, and they come up and give you a hug because they just want to be nice and they feel so happy about you. That's awesome. I'll take that any day. And it's meaningful and it transcends language. It transcends analytics and thought process. It's just a warm relationship between sentient entities that exist. And I think we can extend that far further than we do. I think that's a really good place to build from. And I know that was a really, really long bunch of me saying stuff. So I hope that it tracked and made some sense.
I wanted to speak on something as well. There was something that Arminius Return said, that the divine exists, but you relate to them until you create something that you can relate to, and give life to it by reverence. And I think that we've covered that quite often. The only thing is when we talk about, and I'm going to butcher how it's pronounced because I've seen it in Latin, era Gregoris, the idea that the divine is created by consciousness of man, I don't agree with. But the middle ground that he just mentioned, I do agree with. The reason why we've talked about Pan-Aryanism and why, say, Tyrannus with the wagon wheel and the club, Perun with the bow or the hammer, and Lord Thor with the hammer and the chariot. All of these middle grounds are cultural, unique ways that even within the macro group of Aryans, there are micro relations to the gods. But I definitely believe that one of the key factors that we look at in the Asatru Folk Assembly is the gods are the gods, and that we in turn are sprung from them and gain from them, not vice versa. So I don't know, I don't agree with the whole the gods themselves, but perhaps the relatableness of the gods. Yes, absolutely, with that uniqueness. But we see it with Lord Odin and Vidli and Ve in the creation of consciousness to the folk. And then we see it again with Heimdall as he comes to great-grandmother and great-grandfather, and then he comes to grandfather and grandmother, and then he comes to father and mother. And the acceptance of that knowledge and that being, the direction of that is, as we use it, above to down to us. And I think that's really, really important. But if you're talking about a middle ground where our consciousness and the consciousness of the gods can meet in relation, I think we do that a lot. We see that within our stories. We see that within the down to the colors of, Indra being red skinned, Thor being, red bearded. There are these little nuanced things that allow us to connect to the gods. But I don't believe that the gods would cease to exist if we no longer thought of them, if you will.
And I think, so Arminius, I want you to understand this, because I'm reading you over on the side chat. No one's trying to or Svan and I are not trying to project on you anything, but we are responding to you as if you represent a bunch of listeners that aren't you, but that have expressed similar things that may get from what we're saying. So please don't take any of the stuff we're saying personally, because again, you and I, we haven't had a personal conversation. We're going through this, and I think it's really informative, and I appreciate your participation over on the side. Svan and I are not coming at you. But trying to explain where we come from in our practice of our faith. And yeah, the gods are much bigger and beyond and different than we can possibly comprehend. The pictures in the stories, the imagery helps us to better comprehend them and shape them in a way that makes sense to our brains that we can process. And I think we all agree on that point. And I think that's really important. And we go from there. And what the end result of that actually looks like, how that actually quantifies and whatever, I don't think any of us can accurately speak to that. But we get closer, I believe, the longer we're in a gift cycle with the gods. You mentioned that I don't know who you're speaking to when you say that you're older than them. If it's me and Svan, I mean, seemed a little bit salty when it says you feel as though you're talking to children. But shoot, if you're 70, 80, 90, I have no idea how old you are. We may very well be literally the age of your children. And that is what it is. But I think approaching the gods starting out in a childlike way is a nice way to start. It's the way we all started life. And I think it leads us to a different type of maturity than if we approach religion as if we are too mature for it and try to intellectualize it over much. But I mean, I think everybody in the conversation is well-meaning, and I appreciate that. I've always wanted this to be a place where there's well-meaning questions and well-meaning conversation. I think it's very important. And yeah, it's hard because Svan and I are here in the flesh, as it were, with our voices and our video and little snippets of our life involved, but the people we're talking to aren't, and we don't always know that. So keep in mind, sometimes when we're addressing one of your questions, we're speaking to everyone who's going to watch this show or listen to it that might have similar thoughts, and not just to you who's asking. So next in the queue is, where does the word Aryan come from? I always hear people claim it comes from India, and Indians are the real Aryans, or at least some people in India are the real Aryans and stuff like that. Svan, do you have anything to offer on where that word comes from?
Yeah, so the origination place of our people, the home dale, the place in which we come from, one of the first expansions out was eastward into India, and it was written that they called themselves Arya. So since this is one of the first expansion points, the totality of referring to the people as Arya has value, has a place. And these people come in to India. They're not Indians. They're clearly the Arya, and they're coming in to take over the Dravidian people. And we see this again when the central another group kind of goes central and south, and eventually they become known as Aryans or Iranians. And so I've also heard people say, no, the Iranians are the true Aryans. And again, it's ethnic, linguistic, cultural, and racial. And the language, whether it was a title or not, these two groups kind of held it as a title or chose it as a title. And the other groups that expanded westward, that moved in with and merged with the corded ware people, who were very genetically similar, did not label themselves as Arya, because I don't think that they were as focused. The Himalayan mountains really focused the Aryans moving into India. And the mountains, I forgot the name of the mountain range, forgive me, that's north of Iran. really focused the way that they title themselves. But I do not think that was the same case for those moving westward. It was a much broader expanse, and there was a lot of even cross-fighting as the westward expansion was going. And so what you ended up seeing is the Aryans that moved westward saw the value of that word in titles, say like aristocrat, as a noble, but not necessarily as the name of their people as a whole. Again, because they weren't concentrated into a funnel, and whereas the other two groups were. So you find the value of the word, and that's really what connects us all. If you're talking about Arianus or Arius amongst the Greco-Romans, if you're talking about the ire amongst the Gauls, if you're talking about the aura or the era amongst the Germanic folk, this word has value. And whether they used it as a nomenclature to title themselves, I think that's the biggest difference. Obviously, World War II, people don't want us to use that. They want Kurgan was the big one, and now Yamnaya, and then Indo-European and Proto-Indo-European. And it's kind of like just kind of dodging, playing the game so that, people won't take us seriously if we use the word that they really don't want us to use. And we say, no, this word does have value. Our people, very much could be given that title as we name ourselves. Very much like sub-Saharan Africans, generally, I would say would be worth. Oh, thank you, Bucket Klinger, the Zargros Mountains, or mountain region. But yeah, the idea that in the West they didn't use it as a name, but everywhere in the language it holds true, and everyone can agree that those languages come from a mother source. But because of World War II, we're not allowed to use that nomenclature. And I was saying, we have all these different groups, like in the sub-Saharan Africans, like the common usage of the title Bantu has started to gain popularity amongst those people as a self-name. So I think, people just get confused. They'll say, no, it was the Iranians. No, it was the Indians. And I think that all of those relate to where our folk were coming from.
What about the Irish?
Saying the Irish or Ireland or the Ire. And I see this. The only one that really throws a wrench in everything is the Finno-Ugric people. And I don't say that with any malice at all. It's just one of those ones where I'm like, man, we're missing.
With Finn Wraith on the chat room,
I'm
going to throw shade at the Finno-Ugrics.
I'm not throwing shade at Finn Wraith. No, they're definitely an anomaly of the migrations of our folk, and I think that mainly through linguistics, because now we do see there is actually a great number. Actually, I think they have the most genetic relation to the Yamnaya people, but linguistics is where it gets kind of fuzzy. And those that moved westward, they mixed with the corded ware people, and that's where you get your kind of Western European. I think that it's wrong for us to say we can't say that because someone else doesn't want us to use the word, because it will somehow make us lose legitimacy. And I think that still wins in the ultimate point, is to rob you of your ability to claim that title. That word has value, whether it's noble or honorable or what have you. You don't relent on that. So, we speak of it as a name that clearly has value in our language. Sorry, I'm going to beat a dead horse on that one.
No, you're fine. It is the name for our folk that we gave ourselves and identified by. It remained a marker of nobility. It's the root of aristocracy. It's the root of all of those things. It's really important. And it's interesting to note that Ireland and Iran both mean land of the Aryans, because those were the extent of the migrations of our folk until the modern period, until the discovery of the New World. There's something called the zealotry of the fringe. And when you have the outside of an expanse of people that get further and further from their homelands and from the core of their commonality and their practice, they start really, really cherishing their cultural, their racial identity, because it's not the norm as they break into new lands. What distinguished the Iranians when the Persians were making their conquests were that they were the Aryans, and these other people that they were interacting were not. They were outside of that. And that's why it became such an important identifier back in Central Europe and Northern Europe. It didn't need to be stressed as much because, so are all of the rest of us. And it was understood, but the distinction between us and not us was very keenly felt on the outer edges of that migration. And you see that there. But to answer the question, specifically the term Aryan is a Sanskrit term. It goes back to whatever Proto-Indo-European, which in fact overtook it as the name that we would call it. If we were having this conversation in 1910, Aryan comes from the Aryan language group of Aryan people. That's as far back as you would trace it. We have to call it something else now because of political correct ideologies, unfortunately. But linguistically, it traces itself back there, and it's found in, one way or another in, all of the root languages that I'm familiar with to one degree or another. But yeah, we're, beating that to death now, but it is important. And it's a term of value, of lifting ourselves up and seeing ourselves as something beautiful, something noble, something special, and aspiring to that. And we would not deny that to any other race of people. It's particularly of interest that it's denied us in some circles and worth pondering on. Next question from Monk. And Monk, yes, I getting your messages about the video you want to check out. I will absolutely check it out. I just haven't gotten back to you yet. I do still remember it, and I'm going to look at it when I have some time. But he asks, what is our thoughts on Asatru? Svan, what are your thoughts on that? I can tell where that's heading by your rubbing your eyes on it, but break us off something there.
Yeah, this is a great question, though, because I think it has validity in our modern age and why Asatru is so important. Because Asatru is, again, just another attempt to break, to dissolve. And this is, again, the work of the chaos of these things. When natural law, the Vanir, collided with cosmic order, the Aesir, there was a union made. And that union means that both of them are now inseparable. They've been welded together in heat and in that great collision of battle. So to separate them again, I think has more of a political value, a desire to, I don't want to associate with those patriarchal, genocidal Yamnaya people or Aryans, and I want to go to the matriarchal, Stone Age, Bronze Age, corded wear people because vibes or whatever. It's like, I think that's what the ultimate attempt is But you can't do that because there is so much of that interplay, and it creates another sense of there is a connection between the heavens and the earth, not only just through Thor being the son of heaven and earth, but also through all of the Vanir who become Aesir. And the Holy Frey is mentioned as being, one of the most beloved Aesir. So by the time of the Old Norse, period, the difference between Vanir and Aesir were basically about origin, not about intention, not about divinity, whether it was less or more. The gods, I believe that our ancestors did not look at the Vanir as less of or more of than the Aesir, but instead was a preference based off of cultural needs. The reason why the Holy Frey started to kind of intermix in the tripartite that was generally set, but amongst the Swedes, he started to come in, and it became, in Uppsala, the mentioning of Thor being in the center and the furious one and the fruitful one being to his side. One, I think that, they were moving the godsteads of the gods that they wanted and needed at the time. And that is something that our ancestors did. But, that steps away from the Germanic tripartite or Central European tripartite, where it seems to be that it was of course Teu or Tyr, Woden, and then Thor, and Woden being in the center. So I think it's ultimately just trying to disillusion things, change things, take them off the track, take them away from the way that we've observed our ancestors and the way that they did things. And you see that a lot now. People are trying to, let's say it's not in bad intentions. They're just trying to be different. They're trying to do the edge, and catch the edge. And ultimately, I think it's ridiculous. You cannot separate the two after. If they focused on honoring particular gods who are of the Vanir origin, I could understand that. But to name a title, that tells me that they're deliberately trying to remove themselves from the faith of the totality of the gods. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
So Asatru is a thing that I've encountered only a few times, and I've only heard of it really once in the real world. Conceptually, online, a lot of people just want to be different, and that's an attempt at being different sometimes. A friend of mine went to Sweden, and he met with some people that claimed to be Asatru, and it was just like a wife swap orgy thing, to where like dudes were trying to offer him like to have sex with their wives and stuff. And that, a lot of the time, that's what I think a lot of stuff, a couple of different currents, I think, lead to Asatru. For all the reasons that Svan stated, I don't think it's theologically sound. The Vanir existing separate from the Aesir exists in the most primordial, prehistorical period of time that exists back in the beginning. Very quickly in our lore, they were incorporated, the two melded together and are collectively known as the Aesir. If you are particularly devoted to Njordur or Freyr or Freya, then Asatru is your religion, and that's what you need to be part of. When I have seen online issues of Vanatru, it's I don't know, and I'm sure there's a word for this. Our people, part of our soul sickness is this hyper individuality on everything. Something that has plagued modern Asatru for its entirety, and still to this day. And we fight through it, and we succeed regardless, and make the best of what we have, and we try to heal it the best we have. And I think it's probably healthier now than it's ever been. Everyone wants to wipe the board clean and start fresh, but with them running things. Everybody thinks, okay, but you guys are all doing it wrong. We need to do it my way. And then every single year needs to be year one. I'm proud that in the Asatru Folk Assembly, we are in year 30. That may not seem enormous, but in the realm of modern Asatru, it's huge. Every new person that comes along knows how to do it better, or those guys aren't the boss of me. I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to name it whatever. In this case, I'm going to name it Vanatru. And me and my, whatever folks are with me are going to do it this way. And everyone wants to be different. And I've encountered this with a lot of different people. I've seen it with people on the far left that are super woke, that just want to have fatty orgies and want to call it that. I've seen it with people on the far right that want to be, super that way. But everybody wants to be the king of their own little backyard kingdom. And it's really hurt us due to lack of cohesion over a long period of time and lack of a clear definition of who we are and what we do. And Vanatru is an example of that. I've never seen that as being a legitimate expression of worshiping the Vanir. I've seen that as an excuse for people to do the exact same thing, but only different, with them being the boss. Or the exact same thing, except they're the king of the backyard, camp chair, big piece of chicken battle. Or, we're Vanatru, so we're all about lust and sexuality, so let's have an orgy. I've seen those things literally as a result of that. But none of those things move us forward. I think it's like a lot of the people that want to claim to be Rokatru or whatever. There's just people that go out of their way to, we really like Viking stuff and Norse mythology, but you guys are doing church stuff, and we want to do shoulder pelts and face paint and wife swapping stuff. And I think that's really where that lies. Now, here's the thing. A lot of different people have used the term Vanatru as like a alternative position. It linguistically lends itself to that. So, Monk, whoever you're asking about, they may be a completely different scenario that don't have anything in common with people that I'm addressing. I don't know. I'm just addressing the issues, the people that I know who have claimed to be Vanatru in the past. And again, it's not really something I've ever seen or heard someone who practices that or is that probably for 15 years or more, but that's what I've got to add on the subject for what it's worth.
I would say, obviously, there's the, more fluffy, degenerate side of things. But if we were just to take it at a face value, and I don't actually know if I've ever heard anybody who was actually legit devout and pious that used the word Vanatru to describe themselves. But if I was to think of one, my brain thinks of Gothi Odin and how he considered himself a Thrader's Gothi. If there was a devout and pious side of that could be called that, it would probably be something like that in him.
And as a Gothi since 96, he never once described himself as anything other than Asatru.
Yeah.
So there you have it. And he was a devoted phrase man all the days of his life, at least from that point forward. I'm not sure where he was at before then. But literally, he was a devoted phrase man when I was with him on his deathbed. So Never once did he need to break off and form some kind of Asatru alternative. Last question of the night from Ryan O'Ryan Wotenson. Question: did Matt Flavel, the Owls Harrier Gothi, watch my "Who Did the Gods Call" song in the blues style? I did. I thought it was really entertaining. It's a lot of fun. I think AI music is really interesting. Again, it's not perfect, but I don't know how to make music. So cool. Like I said, I shared it around to the Witan. I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it. There was a Nubian gentleman in at about 2 minutes and 30 something seconds in the video. That slide's probably not the best slide to be in the "Who Did the Gods Call" video. But other than that, I thought it was really cool. Again, it's the first time I have heard something similar to that. I'm slow to get on the AI train and really do a lot of that or see a lot of what that is able to accomplish. I think that's kind of interesting. I think it's interesting that you can do the same song in a bunch of different styles. I think it was interesting, though, because I didn't find it to be particularly bluesy. I wonder on that what they can do to make it more flavorful in whatever genre the attempt is at. But yes, I did absolutely listen to it, and I shared it with folks that I thought might be entertained by it. So, we got another question in that came under the wire. All right. Are there any AFA members in the Netherlands? I'm asking because I might spend some months there at the start of the new year when I'm done with military service. No, there are not, but there will be when you spend a few months there at the end of your military service. And we would love to have more members in the Netherlands.
Try to start something there.
Just not Zwarte Piet. Not eligible.
I would say I would encourage him to, find other Asatru who are just disorganized or not, together and try to, plant that. I think the Asatru Folk Assembly, one of our biggest strengths is that the warrior ethos and the pioneering ethos. The idea that you go and you plant a flag and you try to bring people together, even if it's just 4 people, 5 people, try to get in there, look around, see if you can find someone and say, hey, we're honoring the gods of our people. And, again, you're going into the land of Forseti. I would definitely make a pilgrimage to the island of Forseti as well.
So if you can, and if you do that, please take some pictures and share your trip and your experience with us. My experience in the Netherlands was I had a layover in Amsterdam when I flew to Copenhagen, in and out of Copenhagen one time. On the way back, we had a layover in Amsterdam. The airport was the biggest, most expansive airport I have ever been in. It was like its own city. It was crazy. But yeah, that's the only experience I have there. I think that's really neat. I think what Svan said is absolutely. If you can find other Asatru are there to talk to and get together with and see what they do, and if you're so inclined, tell them about our Asatru Folk Assembly. We would love to have members there. But either way, I hope that you're able to find some folks there that worship the gods. And I hope that if you do, you can come back and share that experience with us, and we can, learn a little bit about it and enjoy it vicariously. But it sounds like a lot of fun and a neat experience. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to figure out what we're doing next week. I will be in transit to Winter Nights in New Hampshire. So unless something happens or a changeover with the flight happens, I will not be leading that broadcast. but we will get something planned. That will be awesome. I am hoping we can get Witan Brandy on here. It's been a little while since she has talked to you guys, and she is always, somebody that you guys enjoy listening to. So that would be great. Make it out to Winter Nights if you can. I would love to see you there. New Hampshire, it's going to be cool. Literally, figuratively, it's also going to be beautiful with the change of the leaves. So hope to see you guys there, and I will talk to you in this format again in 2 weeks from now, when I think we are going over the Lay of Rieg. Is that what's next on our agenda?
Oh, I don't actually. Because of the. Let me see.
Yes.
Riggs Tula. All right. I'm glad I got that one right on the ordering. Cool. So that's what we'll talk to you guys about. That'll be a really fun one. I think it's a really important one. It's one that if you've read the Asatru Trulamal, it is a fundamental element of that. So I'm looking forward to that conversation with you guys. Till then, hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember, victory never sleeps.
Good night, everyone.